We knew they were going to be big by then. We didn't know what big really meant.
It was just a phenomenon. It was an incredible time.
There must have been pangs of jealousy.
Everybody in Liverpool was just completely proud of them.
Well, I thought they'd done it. They've gone the ultimate step. They've sold their fucking souls.
1, 2, 3, 4!
You don't expect your pals, your mates to become big stars, and it was great to see them, with their cheeky sense of humour, taking a rise out of people like Harold Wilson and so on, with the V sign, and I was highly amused. Really, it was just great,
I found it quite amazing that they had got so big so quickly, because they did only start as one of the groups on Merseyside.
Please Please Me was that was a different planet, wasn't it? And I remember we used to listen to Radio Luxembourg and Radio Caroline. You'd be trying to get through to it, and at 10 o'clock it would all be hissing and spitting. And Jimmy Savile was on. And when Please Please Me came out, we knew, John had told us it's being played on Radio Luxembourg at like 10:15 this night. And we listened in, and Jimmy Savile played it, and then he said, well, I sure hope that pleases somebody. And I bet you had to eat those words.
We never thought it was going to take off, even when they had their initial success. But Please Please Me, Love Me Do, we thought, what a load of stupid songs, what a load of crap.
From Me to You was really important because that kind of put the stamp on it. We had the first one, which did good. They let us back in the studio. We did the next one, and then we had the album, which did good. And then From Me to You, the next single, because remember, everybody would try to do in those days, make a single that sounded just like the one that was the previous one, that was the hit. And we kind of avoided that, but if you notice, it did have the harmonica still on it, which was like a little trademark at that time.
We brought it to George Martin. Hey, George, and we did, yeah. And the little 6-type cluster that we got at the end of it. George said, no. We said, why? He said, it's very corny, that end, a 6th. He said, it's like the old days, dun 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 dun, wah. He said, it's very corny. He said, I'd never do it. And we didn't understand. We just said, it's great, George. Such a great sound. He said, it's a 6th. We said, it doesn't matter. It's just great. And we just said, we've got to have it. We stuck out for that, corny or not. So George would give us these sort of parameters. He'd say, you mustn't double a 3rd, or it's corny to end with a 6th. We said, we like it, man. It's bluesy. Classical people will say, no, you can't do that. So whenever I met that, I'd say, bloody well do it.
I couldn't believe that they would sink so low as to clean themselves up, comb their hair, bow after a song, and play these silly songs with silly chords with hardly any 7ths. I thought, God, thank God I'm not doing this.
When they played Sunday night at the Palladium, I think royalty was there, and John Lennon made that remark.
For our last number, I'd like to ask your help. For the people in the cheaper seats, clap your hands.
And those in the orchestra stall just rattle your jewellery. And I'm watching, I said, Christ, what have I done? And I just picked a cushion off the settee and threw it at the television in frustration. But now I think, just to be part of the history of what must be the most famous pop group that's ever existed, I'm quite proud of the fact that I was there. People say you should be a millionaire. I am, of memories. A millionaire couldn't have had the fun and the excitement of those formative years. I didn't know we were making history, but you wouldn't be here now if it wasn't history.
We said that we wanted to sit out at the front, and John said no. He said, you'll stay in the wings. No, we want to sit out there. No, he said, you're staying in the wings. It's not safe down there. Eventually, we moaned him down and we were allowed to go and sit at the front. So we sat in the third row. And the second they came on, everybody just lunged towards the front. And John said, get the girls, and we were hauled over the platform at the stage, right into the wings. He said, I told you.
Brian Epstein was not the typical manager. He was a sort of class act. Very proper Englishman, you know, and so very mature, very serious, and thought about everything that was asked of him and the things that he wanted done, and he just took to it naturally, you know. And the papers in England were just going wild for the guy, and we were not. America was not playing their records. I said, I'm going to get him. I got him at home in Liverpool. Mr. Bernstein, he said, what do you want with my boys? He says, it's like committing suicide. We can't get in the airplane. And I just ad-libbed, or maybe I believed it. I said, but you will. He said, where would you present them? I said, at Carnegie Hall.
John, so far, all British pop stars have not made a tremendous impact on the States. How do you think you're going to fare?
Well, I can't really say, can I? I mean, is it up to me? No. I mean, I just hope we go all right, you know.
We were in Paris one time, playing the Olympia in Paris, when back at the hotel, and a telegram came through from Capitol Records of America to Brian. He came running in the room. Hey, look, you're #1 in America. Well, just, I mean, I can't describe. We just, hey, you know, that was it. Like, we just didn't come down for a week.
They think your haircuts are un-American.
Well, it was very observant of them, because we aren't American, actually.
We saw them going down the plane. You know, we were watching the news. We were in England, weren't we? And it was just like people crying and screaming and stuff like that.
There are rumors around that this is Britain's revenge for the Boston Tea Party. 3,000 screaming teenagers are at New York's Kennedy Airport to greet, you guessed it, the Beatles. This rock and roll group has taken over as the kingpins of musical appreciation among the younger element. Their first meeting with the American press brings forth an interview laced with quips and humor.
It's not true, it's not true.
They were, you know, it was their manner, their style, their humor. At the press conference, they were accepted right after that press conference.
No! Sorry. Next question. You can sing.
No, we need money first. I got a question. Do you want to get a haircut at all?
No, thanks.
I had one yesterday.
That's no lie.
When we arrived, they all just sort of hanging all over the airport. And yeah, and thousands of pressmen and thousands of New York cops and things. And they were, I don't know, it's just ridiculous, you know, screaming. And we were just sort of driving along and listening to the DJ show on the radio. And as we were going along, it was reporting it. You know, and the fellow saying, and in 20 minutes' time we were going to switch over to the Plaza Hotel, New York. You know, and it's great, marvelous. And just as we were getting out of the car, he said, we hear they've arrived now.
Brian had invited me to a press party at the Plaza a few hours after they arrived, you know. So here I am standing outside. I figured there was about 1,500 kids outside. And I'm thinking, nobody recognizes me. I'm responsible for this, you know. And then they pulled up. And I do remember when Paul got out, they were a little frightened. because the crowd didn't expect a reception like this in America. Paul stood at the top of those stairs, turned around and threw a kiss, and the place went wild. So he became America's sweetheart.
You, George, are the only Beatle who had been in America before this trip, is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. September.
At that time, did anybody out there know of the Beatles, especially?
Nobody out here either. In New York, I went into a record shop to ask if they'd ever heard of us, and they hadn't.
They had learned to respond to the request of photographers, that they do this, they do that. So they felt that they had to kind of perform for us, but that's who they were at that time.
John was being funny, very bright, funny. I forgot the things he was throwing at the other guys. Ringo was a bit of a clown, a really funny, comical guy. And George, always silent, studious, listening. Each one was so much different than the other. It was amazing.
People say to me, which was your favourite Beatle? And I always quote Big Mal Evans, who was the roadie, and I always give him credit. I always say, this is one of those quotes that I wish I could have thought of. And some fan asked him, Mal, which is your favourite Beatle? And he thought for a few seconds and he said, the one I was last with.
It sold out, it broke all records for quantity. It sold out the 2 shows in a matter of minutes. The kids here were standing up on the seats, and the management thought the seats, there was going to be a lot of damage. Luckily there was no damage. I wasn't sued or asked to pay damages, you know, but it was kind of wild, the crowd, you know. Sullivan called and found out that a New Yorker by the name of Bernstein had the Beatles for February 12th. His show always ran on a Sunday. He booked them for the Sunday before and then the Sunday after.
When they pulled up to the studio to do the Ed Sullivan show, as the car pulled up, there were the girls running after the car and then knocking on the window of the car and screaming and shouting and just in some kind of ecstasy.
Unbeknownst to us, while we're out, they send in the cleaning crew, and they have some dear old lady who decided, all these chalk marks all over the board, I better wipe these off, they look so messy. So after spending a whole afternoon there trying to get the sound right, this dear old lady cleaner decided she didn't like chalk on the console and wiped out all our settings. So what you get is what you get, not what you should have had.
When we did the Sullivan show with the Beatles, it was February 9th, 1964. It was absolute pandemonium, and so we're in the wings, and I'm trying to figure, what the hell are we going to, they're not even going to hear a joke, you know, and I'm telling Marty, so I said, you know, when Sullivan introduces us, you know, we better just go into a Beatles song. So, and I didn't even know the songs because, you know, it was the first time I'm hearing them, and they had already done I Want to Hold Your Hand and the whole thing. So Marty says, well, we got to do the routine. I said, there's no way they're going to hear a joke. So these kids are screaming, and you could just barely hear something, Alan and Rossi, you know. So we go out there, and Marty says, hello there, I'm Ringo's mother, right? So the kids started screaming at that point even more.
John Lennon was strumming, you know, singing something to himself, running, and I walked over and I said, John? He said, yes. I said, a lot of people mistake me for you. And he looked at me.
Oh, well, I'd like to thank Mr. Ed Sullivan, who's been great while we've been over here, because he's looked after us and he's made us really feel at home.
I asked Brian, I said, Brian, since you're going to be here for Sullivan Sunday, I said, would you want to pick up? I think I offered him 100,000 or 50,000, I forgot. I said, to play Madison Square Garden, we could sell it out in a hurry. And I checked with the garden, they were open on a Friday before the second Ed Sullivan show. And I took him to Madison Square Garden, and he kept studying it and looking at it. I said, Brian, I don't even have to make, I did say to, I don't even have to make $1 out of this concert. I just want to satisfy a lot of kids whose parents have called me and really want to see them.
What were you going to do if you got into the press conference?
We were going to speak to
just wanted to meet him more than anything. I love George so much, and the policemen wouldn't even believe the truth. All they ever do is believe lies. It doesn't matter. They've got barbed wire fences in the front row seats. We have to use binoculars to see them.
George, there's been some remarks accredited to the Beatles that you aren't too appreciative of all the jelly beans being thrown at you on your tour.
No, it's a bit dangerous, you know, because jelly bean travelling about 50 miles an hour through the air, if it hits you in the eye, well, you're finished, you know, you're blind, aren't you? So we've never liked people throwing stuff like that. We don't mind them throwing streamers.
And here they are, fresh from their triumphant appearances in the United States. 12,000 young Britons roar a welcome. Their shrieks rise in an awesome way. Some brave volunteers among the British police elect to act with heroism above and beyond the call of duty and escort the Beatles to their car. There hasn't been this much excitement at the London airport since man learned to fly. So there you have the homecoming of the Beatles, the return of the heroes to their native land. They did what the Redcoats couldn't do in the American Revolution. They conquered the colonies.
One day early in 1964, around 8:30 one morning, there was a little knock on the door. And Jean, my wife, went to the door. And there's a guy standing there and he said, is Alf around? She says, yes, who are you? He said, I'm from NEMS Enterprises. He said, I'm from Brian Epstein. So she called me and down I go. He says to me, do you want a job working for a bunch of guys, musicians, a rock band? I said, it sounds interesting. I said, who's it for? He said, it's for the Beatles. So I get outside the apartment building and I put my foot on the brake a little bit too quick. And poor old George, God bless you, George, he's banged his head on the window. And he said, oh, my poor head. Words to that effect, you know. Neil calmed him down, and as I'm thinking to myself, Alf, this is the fastest, the shortest, and the quickest job that you've ever had in your life. But no, it all turned out, and George and I became very, very firm friends. That was how I became aware of the Beatles. For the Beatles to travel the world, there was Neil Aspinall, their principal road manager, Mal Evans, God bless him. No, he used to look after all the instruments. I started out as their limo driver and then got elevated to a roadie and a bodyguard and a T-boy and a shoeshine boy. And we used to have to there was just the three of us to look after the four of them, you know. It was a tremendously dangerous job. I mean, there was mornings that I used to get up to go to work, but I used to wake up and I said, I can't do this anymore. I'm finished, you know. Strange thing was that the moment I got one in the car, all the fears just disappeared.
In those days, and it's not much different now, but certainly in those days, if a Beatle sneezed, it was headline news.
Beatlemania has ceased to be a phenomenon and seems to have become a way of life. When the quartet with hair like unmade beds arrive in the Netherlands, it's the same story as in Britain and the US. People who value their sanity head for cover and let the teenagers take over. The Beatles find it safer to take to the water as they tour the canals through lines of cheering fans. These, incidentally, are not the real Beatles. There's a substitute drummer in the quartet, for Ringo Starr is ill. It's an illness his fans take to heart, even if they run out of room on the side.
I had to take him into Middlesex, or University College Hospital, I think it was. And that was one of my sort of really first experiences of what it was like when he was coming out of hospital. And he's looking at me, you know, it's documented, and there's me standing there, you know, 6'1" of me, and Ringo's looking at me after the tonsils. He can't talk very well, And it's the only photograph of actually me with a chauffeur's emblem, Rolls-Royce driver and stuff like that.
They kept it secret the time of Ringo's departure. If they hadn't, half London would have been brought to a standstill.
It wasn't long after that we were driving along one day when the window opened and the hat suddenly was ripped off my head and thrown out the window, and I could see it scudding across the street. John leaned forward and tapped me on the shoulder. He said, "Alf, you don't need that anymore." He says, "You're one of us."
Ringo, he was good at coming up with things like that. It was just a slip of the tongue, really. You know, he said it's been a hard day's night, you know, when we'd been doing a gig and driving and doing all that stuff, and he just said it. And we'd all fall around on the floor because Ringo would just say these things quite innocently.
Very quick-witted, and we were always laughing together, even when we were working commercials. He's got this incredible brain where he can add things into a scene and give you a complete twist to it from the comedy angle. And I think because the Beatles themselves were very down-to-earth people, which Dick is as well, they could probably see themselves within Dick. They used to call him Uncle Dick because he was the elder.
Today's assignment is making their first movie, A Hard Day's Night.
There was only one sequence in the film, which was on, let's say, the cutting room floor, and that was a sequence with Paul, which was upstairs in the theatre with a girl talking, and it didn't work at all, and so we took that out. But other than that, the film stayed as it was, and the editing of the film really started a whole new style in editing and developed into what had become the style for television commercials editing, in fact. It was very fast moving.
It's the Beatles. This is an historic film event.
I know the door of this fridge. Open.
A celebration of youth.
I bet you're a great swimmer.
A movie phenomenon. A triumph.
Hard Day's Night was brilliant. I mean, I loved Hard Day's Night because it was the first really intelligent rock film that was like really fun. I mean, that was a movie you could see over and over again. I mean, it was like the Marx Brothers meet rock and roll, and you couldn't top that. I remember that was our favorite date movie. We'd go see that. I mean, you could see that 10 times in a row and not get bored.
You know what just happened to me?
No, don't. We can't walk out just now. Can't he? Done it's done.
John, Paul, George, and Ringo have 48 hours to solve the mystery and save the music. The Beatles.
It's my considered opinion that you're a bunch of sissies.
In A Hard Day's Night.
They were prisoners in hotel rooms, weren't they? They just went from hotel room to hotel room to hotel room. And I can't imagine going into those hotel rooms, no matter how nice they were, and they were lovely, and like almost somebody locking the door and saying, "Well, you're not allowed out until we need you to perform again." Must have been horrendous for them.
It's not easy. All you got to do is sort of clap your hands.
Clap your hands.
Clap your hands. Or if you don't want to clap your hands, sort of stamp your feet on the floor.
One of the toughest things about the Beatles and the 60s was the isolation that they had to live through. Not being able to go to a cinema, to a restaurant, or to walk down the street. This was really, really tough. I can remember on one occasion we were in the Georges V Hotel in Paris, and we used to go out. We're getting packs of cards, mechanical toys and all that, just to take away the tedium of being prisoners of their own fame. And it was very tough. Dressing rooms was always tough, you know. Aeroplanes, limousines, hotel rooms, theatre dressing rooms, do the show.
I hear anyway that the four of you are going to be millionaires by the end of the year. That's nice. Have you got time to actually spend this money?
What money?
Doesn't he give any to you?
No.
And all they think of is, oh, all that money you've got, and you've got a big house and car and all that sort of thing. But problems that come along with that. Every £100 we've earned, we've got £100 worth of problems to balance it.
John was making a business, a very successful business, and that necessarily meant parking the family in a very nice place and saying, I'll be back when I'm back. So I think a lot of the neglect of Julian was John getting on his feet. But Cynthia was there. She wasn't working. His mother was there. This was acceptable in all sorts of families where the husband had a job that kept him out of the house while the child was up. John seems to have been victimised over it.
I don't think anybody will want to hear a song called 8 Arms Soul. It's a crummy title, I think. You know, it was okay, we were getting a bit desperate for titles, and then somebody said 8 Arms Soul, and Ringo said it, and we all said, yeah, great, you know. But then we suddenly realised a couple of days after that we were all sick of it.
Out of Dick Lester's mouth it came, our director and friends.
I thought it came out of his shoe.
Well, Dick sort of slowly went up to us one at a time, punching us, saying it's going to be called Help. And we said, yeah, that's a great idea, Dick, sir. We'll call it that, and that's how it all became about. Well, it's in colour for a start, and I don't know, there's a lot more happening in this. There's a story, you see. In the last one, it was just sort of documentary, but this is a real film, almost.
I need somebody help, not just anybody help. I need someone help.
While I was writing with John, when we were doing things like Help, I never could have seen that as a cry for help. Because it's two guys, you know, just two guys, young guys together. We was writing, when I was younger, so much younger than today. I'm more interested in going, when I was young, putting a little counterpoint to it, than listening to what he's saying. I mean, looking at his lyrics now, it's like, God in heaven, why didn't someone notice what he was saying, you know?
We had made a date to speak in January of '65 about Madison Square Garden. I said, Brian, I've changed my mind about the garden. I'd like to present him at Shea Stadium. Wow, how big is that? It has 55,000 seats, and it's available. He says, isn't that kind of large? I said, Brian, I'll pay you $10 for every vacant seat. He said, well, if you are that sure, let's do it.
We were in the dressing room at Shea Stadium, and Mal had 4 guitars to get out onto the stage, which was right out in the center. So I said, Mal, make it easier. I said, I'll bring 2 and I'll follow you. So I'm following Mal. We went out of the dressing room, down this long tunnel, and to this opening. As we approached this opening, the noise, it was physical. It was absolutely physical. And you could feel this, and I'm shaking. And I get out there and I leave Mal to do, you know, give him the guitars. And I sort of wend my way gently back to the dressing room. And I opened the dressing room door, and I must have looked a little bit odd or something, because I closed the dressing room door and I just leaned against the door, and they're laughing, the boys.
Brian, he loved that band so much. You've only got to watch him. If you watch there's a classic, to me, still, to this day. There's a moment in a concert, I think it was Shea Stadium, I'm not sure, when there's a shot of him and he's standing there watching them, and you can see the pride on his face, and he's just standing there, and it's Brian saying, these are the boys.
John put it to me so beautifully. He says, you know, Sid, at Shea Stadium, he said, I saw the top of the mountain. And I looked at him, I was sitting next to him. I said, you know, John, so did I. That's what it was. I meet people today, you know, say, hey, we were at your concert in '65. we were there. Didn't hear a word. We hadn't got the sound out properly. In '66 we did. Brought them back again the following year. But just being there was incredible. The excitement.
The Beatles first came to the United States, I think in '64. They wanted to meet Elvis, and it never worked out. So in '65, when they came back again, Brian Epstein and the Colonel got together and talked about seeing if they can arrange a meeting.
Walk in, one at a time. John, Paul, George, Ringo, Neil, Mal, Eppie. Alf brings up the rear.
And they came up there, and they were kind of stiff when they first got there because, you know, here they are in front of Elvis.
And that's where Elvis got up off the chair and the couch, and he said, well, these guys are all going to sit around and look at me, so I'm going to sleep.
After a little bit of chattering and talking and stuff like this, Elvis leans over behind him and he's passing out the guitars. And then they were sort of doing a little riff. How did you do that? Blah, 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 blah.
The next thing I know is the Beatles and Elvis are jamming together. And this went on for like hour and a half, 2 hours.
And the great thing about it, there's only sort of a few of us that were there that can tell the story, because there were no photographs taken, there was no audio of this get together.
George Harrison, hello. MBE.
Oh, thank you.
John Lennon, MBE.
Oh, so,
Ringo Starr, MBE. And Paul McCartney, MBE. The Palace of the Queen has lived through many historic events, and it's our privilege today to witness one of the most earth-shaking. The audience outside Buckingham may give you an inkling of what's going on. Who's been getting in the oldsters' hair the past few years? Why, the boys who invented hair, the Beatles. Fresh from an audience with the Queen, they hold medals, indicating they have been made members of the most excellent order of the British Empire. The original announcement caused a minor uproar. A couple of MBEs returned their medals, but the raucous foursome accepted the honor quietly. That's more than you can say for the fans who stormed the palace gates. They made the staid walls shiver with their moans and cries for the heroes.
When the news came through about the MBEs, John had taken on a driver to take the workload off me, so that Cynthia always had somebody and John always had somebody as well. People often say, Alf, the way you swept in through those Buckingham Palace gates. I said, it wasn't me. Brian had recently taken the lease of a theatre called the Savile Theatre. Now, Neil and I was there with the press corps, because this is where the boys were going to come after receiving MBEs from Her Majesty the Queen. And they turned up and they gave the press, you know, what they wanted, Beatles, MBE. But then a few days later, it started to come out. What are those young lads, you know, funny haircuts and getting medals and stuff like that, you know, we fought for king and country, blah, blah.
This is a form of protest to the Queen, because this order is being debased by everybody in giving this to people who are not deserving of it.
If I had the MBE, I think I should be slightly put out at being placed on the same level as a pop singer.
Once they were writing all their own songs, well, just rose and rose, got bigger and bigger. I was quite impressed the way they changed, because they were so popular they didn't really need to, but they wanted to, because they wanted to progress to, you know, different things, not just the same songs that they used to always do.
When they started writing very good songs and very original stuff, and bringing the sevenths back in and a few things that I recognized from earlier, of course I was very impressed as well. Oh yeah, Norwegian Wood, I thought, well, that sounds very good, you know. I thought, thank God they dropped this other shit.
this mad photographer who was a sort of Salvador Dali fan. We got to the studio and was for a session. As usual, we're bored stiff. We looked bored most of the time. Those pictures, those periods, really hated having photographs took. They had all this meat and babies and all, whatever it was. And we thought, great, because we like surrealism. And we liked it. Oh, I remember I liked it.
Some teenagers have said, have repeated your statement, said the Beatles, I like the Beatles more than Jesus Christ. What do you think about that?
Well, originally I was pointed out that fact in reference to England, that we meant more to kids than Jesus did, or religion at that time. I wasn't knocking it or putting it down, I was just saying it as a fact. And it is true, especially more for England than here. But I'm not saying that we're better or greater or comparing us with Jesus Christ as a person or God as a thing or whatever it is. I just said what I said and it was wrong or was taken wrong, and now it's all this.
The quote which John Lennon made to a London columnist more than 3 months ago has been quoted and represented entirely out of context.
You just thought, how can anyone have misconstrued what he said? I felt desperate, we all did, for John at that time. He never meant it like that. He said, oh, Julia, I never meant to offend anybody at any time with that remark, and it was as big a shock to him as anything else.
I think he was jealous of Jesus for many years. If you understand what I mean, he was, envious of there having been a Jesus, because Jesus is what he would have liked to have been, but a guitar-playing Jesus.
I was with John when he did this interview. It was just an innocent thing that John said. And I mean, interviews after that, when we go to America and in the South, the DJs and that are saying, bring out your records and all your albums and stuff like that, and they were destroying the stuff in the streets, Where are all these people today? The Beatles live on,
Actually, if any of the promoters were so concerned, and it was their wish that a concert should be cancelled, I wouldn't in fact stand in their way. As a matter of fact, the Memphis concert, which is nearest to the place where this broke out, apparently sold more tickets yesterday than they had done up until that date.
This is Doug Layton and Tommy Charles. We're reminding you that our fantastic Beatle boycott is still in effect. Don't you forget what the Beatles have said. And don't forget to take your Beatle records and your Beatle paraphernalia to any one of our 14 pickup points in Birmingham, Alabama, and turn them in this week if possible.
Yeah, I didn't want to talk because I thought they'd kill me, because they take things so seriously here, I mean, they shoot you and then they realise that it wasn't that important. So I didn't want to go, but Brian and Paul and the other Beatles persuaded me to come. I was scared stiff, And I look at a couple of press conferences on film where I'm sort of saying, well, what I really meant was I wasn't condoning that we were bigger than Jesus. I was just saying, well, the fact is kids follow us and not Jesus. Going through all this sort of hypocrisy and terrified, I was really scared. One night on a show in the South somewhere, somebody let off a firecracker while we were on stage, and there had been threats to shoot us. The Klan were burning Beatle records outside, and a lot of crew-cut kids were joining in with them. And somebody let off a firecracker, and every one of us, I think it's on film, look at each other, because each thought it was the other that had been shot. It was that bad, I don't know how I did it.
We land in Tokyo. This also is well documented. The Happy Jackets, and Alf carrying all the bags and things like this. Check into the Hilton Hotel. Now we have 24 or 48 hours at the hotel, and then it's time to go and do the concert at the Budokan. Now when we come out of the hotel, there is a student demonstration, and the demonstration was because the students thought that the Beatles are going to be a bad influence on the young people.
The thing is that if somebody from Japan, if a dancing troupe from Japan goes to Britain, nobody tries to say in Britain that they're violating the traditional laws, you know, or that they're trying to spoil anything. All we're doing is coming here and singing because we've been asked to. And
We have to watch singing and wrestling anyway.
Yeah. But we're not trying to violate anything, and we're just as traditional anyway.
We sit down in the hotel room and somebody switched on the TV. And then after a short while, the news came over the TV that the Beatles are going to be entertained at a banquet by the First Lady, Imelda Marcos. And immediately they said, oh no, no, we're not. Words to that effect. Didn't want to do it. Anyway, away we go. The boys did an incredible concert, 20,000 people. And there was still nonsense going on about the Beatles turning down this request from the First Lady. So now we've got to leave the place. And we get to the airport and we're sort of being attacked. We eventually get onto the plane, and the first words were spoken once we got onto the plane was Ringo. And he said, God, he said, we could have been killed out there, you know.
So we got to the airport, and our road manager had a lot of trouble trying to get the equipment in because the escalators had been turned off and things. So we got there and we got put into the transit lounge. And then we got pushed around from one corner of the lounge to another. You know.
You treat like ordinary passenger. Ordinary passenger, they say. It's an ordinary passenger. He doesn't get kicked, does he?
Did you get kicked?
No, I was very delicate and moved every time they touched me.
To me, Brian will always be the fifth Beatle. But George certainly is the sixth. And he had this genius. And I've been there so many hours in Abbey Road. And one of the boys would say, hey, George, you know, I want so-and-so in there. You know, what do you think? He'd say, yes, I hear what you're saying, George, Paul, John. Doesn't matter which one. I think a couple of saxophones and a trombone in there. And he could interpret that. He knew what they were trying to say.
We did a lot of learning together. He had a very great musical knowledge and background. So he could translate for us and suggest a lot of things, which he did, you know, and he'd come up with amazing technical things like slowing down the piano and playing it slow and putting it on and things like that, you know, where we'd be saying, well, can we on it go, and he'd say, well, look, chaps, I thought of this afternoon, and I came up with this, you know, and we said, oh, great, we'll put it on here, you know.
They generally wrote their own songs and then would play the one to the other. The other might suggest a little bit of a change in the middle, and that was the extent of their collaboration. But it was very much a competition, and a very healthy one, too. Whoever had composed the song would sing it to me, generally with an acoustic guitar. I would sit myself on a stool in the studio, and they would stand in front of me and just sing away. And then we would work out what to do, right? Okay, let's decide how we're going to do the introduction. Should we have a change of key? What instrument should we bring in? I was always wanting to have new sounds and new ideas coming through.
I was lying in bed one night, and you know that moment just before you drift off to sleep, this is a little limbo moment. And somehow in that little limbo moment, I thought, this might be good for Ringo, a children's song. Because Ringo was always very good with kids. And this idea of a yellow submarine, like a kid's book or something, came into my mind.
The interesting bit about the sound in the middle of that, besides the engine noises and the water which was blowing in a straw, I mean, we did all our own sound effects. And I was at one end of the studio shouting, "Help to caper! Help to caper!" And John was in another, "Hey, Captain, oh, here, Captain!" You know, we all just sort of made it up on the spot.
One particular night they were doing a number, and John called me over. He said, "Alf, get something to make some noises with." I said, what do you want? He said, well, see what you can find. Under the stairs in Studio 2, there was this cupboard, and I had all sorts of bits of all sorts of things for making noises. I found a piece of chain, an old tin bucket type thing, and a bell. And if you listen to Yellow Submarine and the voice shouts out, you know, full steam ahead, Mr. Bosun, and you hear the bells ringing, and you feel the clank of the chain. This is me within this big bucket of water, you know.
When the Beatles came along, I totally missed it. When they started, I thought they were just a very poor imitation band. I mean, I Want to Hold Your Hand, to me, was virtually asexual, melodically basic, and lyrically inane. I mean, I could see the long hair being cute, and I could see the girls going for that, but musically, I thought they'd never sustain. It took me almost until Rubber Soul and Revolver to realize that this group was as big as important as everybody else thought.
I think that eventually the monotony and the repetition, the touring stopped on that cold, damp night at Candlestick Park. And we got back to the dressing room and we sat on a sofa. And John sat to my right and he said, Alf, that's it. He says, no more touring. And I understood that, you know.
You get to Candlestick Park in 1966. I wasn't there, but again, we all know about it. And I did talk to John about it. Did you really not sing? No. Did you really not produce a voice? No. The screaming was that intense and that overwhelming that they didn't sing and nobody knew.
We'd do the same show in two towns. One, we'd come off feeling good, and one we'd come off feeling bad, but we'd get the same reaction to both shows. No one would know the difference bar us. Well, you feel like, what am I doing? You know, I'm playing the biggest load of in the well, and people are standing and cheering.
They were human beings, and this is what we forget all the way down the line, who get tired. Maybe they hadn't eaten. Maybe they'd had a drink. Maybe they hadn't slept. Maybe they weren't achieving what they wanted to achieve in their private lives. Maybe they wanted some time to themselves just occasionally. We're all in it's forgetting that they were human beings with all the foibles and physical weaknesses of a human being.
Will you be doing films on your own next year? No, I don't want to make a career of it. I did it just because I felt like doing it. Dick Lester asked me, and I said yes. And I wouldn't have done it if the others hadn't liked it. You know. They said fine, because we were on holiday anyway.
How I Won the War. The Memoirs of Lieutenant Ernest Goodbody. Musketeer Gripweed, My Faithful Batman.
Nice place you got here.
The Beatles started off 3 or 4 years ago by being very unconventional and being ahead of their time, being something new. Now they're outrageously out of date.
It was a state of being, but it wasn't a good state of being for the stars who became the victims of Beatlemania. They were the biggest victims of Beatlemania, weren't they?
I think that's what endeared them to people, because they were so real. I mean, they were just like, they weren't phony about whatever they did. They were just young guys playing rock and roll, and they became famous. But the nice thing about it, they didn't change as far as getting ego tripping and what have you. They, you know, it was all a shock to them. You know, what's going on? Beatlemania, what's all this? So that, I think, really, really endeared them to people too, you know, that they were down-to-earth guys that people could relate to.
Their character, their uniqueness, their on there, it sort of became part of the fabric of our lives. I mean, it was so ingrained that not even Presley and not even the Stones came anywhere close to the way they did. We can't forget it. Part of our lives.
I often feel there was something akin to karma going on in some way. These were the right guys at the right time in the right place. Nobody else could have done it. But it had to be done. Some intelligence decided that this is the way it should be. These guys have got to meet, and they've got to go to Hamburg. They've got to do it there. They've got to do a couple of recordings, and then go back and do some nonsense before they can really make this impression on the world, which they did, for the good of mankind.
George and I sat together on a plane once, and we were sort of expressing the feelings that people have, you know. And this I learnt from George. You just can't sit there and wait for the love and the friendship and companionship and everything to come to you. You have to give it out first before you can get it back. So I say, God bless the Beatles, God bless John, Paul, George and Ringo.